All right, joining us now here on In the Circle and D1 Softball, powered by 643. We normally give her the fall off on this show for many reasons. Number one, that way she needs a break from talking to me. But number two, she is super busy broadcasting, 100 sports across the state of California there and in Palo Alto in particular. Of course, she is a now two-time award-winning Golden Mikes winner for her stellar work as a broadcaster. She is the co-host of the D1 Softball podcast during the season. She also is a host of the podcast on the Believe Network. Former Stanford standout and broadcaster and friend of the show, Jenna Becerra there. This was a big deal to get you to come on the fall. We normally leave you alone, but we have good reasons to have you on. But how you doing?
I'm good. I was going to say, is there really ever an off season? Does that even exist?
If there
If
is,
so,
I
it's
haven't
news to
seen it.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I still do a podcast year round. So, and somehow I still have plenty of material like what we have right now out at D1 Softball. We just had come out a week ago and we're re-releasing it on the graphics, of all quarter century list, which we all were at D1 Softball were a part of it and having input on that. Which you could check out right now on d1softball.com as well as on the social media page on the D1 Softball Instagram as well as on the Facebook and of course on X. What other? We had other social medias we want to do. I think we have it everywhere there.
Instagram, X, Facebook, TikTok. There's a bunch. YouTube, but that's a big one too that we're putting
YouTube.
more and more content on. Yeah.
That's right. The YouTube channel is there.
Mhm.
So we're going to break down kind of the list that we've come up with. It's 100 athletes that came out to be with 25 in each category that we've come up with, which was the best top 25 hitters in the power conference leagues, the top 25 pitchers in the power conference leagues, the top 25 two-way players, as well as the top 25 hitters in the non-power conferences and the top 25 pitchers in the non-power conferences. Now, we'll explain some of this reasoning for this because we've certainly gotten a lot of feedback from fans and not on the pod, but also on social media. For example, make sure you check all the lists out because we've gotten, like, hey, where's Jenny Finch on the top 25 pitcher list? Well, she's on the two-way list, and one of the rules we all decided was a player can only be eligible in one category. We didn't want to multiply it where we have players in multiple categories because one of the reasons, and I agree with this, we wanted to showcase as many athletes as possible, which is an impossible job because, as we'll talk about, there were some snubs and all that. Which people
Yeah, of course. There still wasn't enough room, but
not
we
enough
wanted
room.
to feature more talent, and there is more than enough talent to be able to do that and just keep each player, each person to one list. Obviously, there are some that could qualify just by talent, more than one. But yes, this is how we did it so that we could showcase all of those athletes.
What's other couple of things people need to know about the rules before we break down the list that you've gotten feedback or I've gotten feedback on?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned the 5 lists. There are five lists of 25 people. So I think that's, what is that, 125 total athletes?
Yes,
between
good.
that.
That's good. That's why you have the Stanford degree and I don't because you're better. you count that out a lot better than I did. Yes.
Yeah, I was a comm major, but once in a while I can do a little bit of math. But yes, so we have all of those. I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that this is the quarter century. So I think some people were like, what about so and so and so and so from the 90s or the very end of the 90s? That's not within this last quarter century. It's the last 25 years. So keeping that in mind too when you're looking at this list. And the fact that, two-way players specifically, this is a list where we were thinking about it. And we were like, okay, they needed to play regularly on both sides, pitching and hitting, and do so for the majority of their career. So if they didn't, they still might have ended up on the pitchers list, for example, or another list. But like that's where those criteria came from our standpoint for the two-way players and differentiating them from just the pitchers list.
Correct. So that's why you need to make sure you check both because if there's a pitcher that you're like, wait a minute, she should be on the top 25 pitcher list. Why is she not? Like Danielle Laurie. Well, it's because Danielle Laurie. And this is one of the reasons.
Two-way player.
Two-way player. And one of the reasons we're doing this is to educate because I think we learn a lot in this process. Like I had forgotten that Jenny Finch was a great two-way player. We always think of her as just a pitcher, but she was a great two-way player throughout her career. Another one that comes to mind is Amanda Scarborough.
Yes.
Who I think it's because obviously of everything she does now with her pitching clinics and lessons that she does, that we just think of her as a pitcher when we see her on the broadcast. But
Right.
she was a great hitter. In fact, when I've had her on the podcast, she's talked about how she was a more of a hitter than a pitcher, in her younger years before she developed to what she became as one of the great Texas A&M Aggies. So I hope it's educational, which is why I
Yes.
encourage people to check out the 5 list, not just one list, where I think people
Right.
sometimes jump to conclusions.
Yes. And I think just in general, understanding our history as a sport, this is only the last 25 years. You can go back 25 more years, 50 years ago, and really start to get some of the earlier elements and people who helped shape this sport where these last 25 years wouldn't have been able to happen. But it is pretty crazy when you look back and see all the different eras, whether it's the early 2000s to the teens to the 20s and so on, how it's evolved as a sport, but just how much talent there has always been. But the media coverage has just increased ever since. So now we're getting a chance to actually go back to some of those who didn't maybe get as much media coverage as the sport should have had back then and give them a little bit of love, which that's one of the things I like about this.
Now, one of the many reasons I wanted to have you on this to talk about it is you have a fascinating perspective in that you've, in some cases, maybe have played with some of these players on this list, whether it be in college or maybe prior to that. Some of them you went up against.
Yeah.
Some of them now you have covered since as a media person, whether it be on the podcast, whether cover them at games as a broadcaster, being at games and stuff like that. And there might be even some that you watched growing up that may have
Yep.
influenced you. So you have a unique perspective. How many athletes? I mean, you don't have to give me an exact number, but how many names do you looked at that list? You're thinking, wait, I played with her. B, I maybe played against her. C, I've covered her.
Oof. Okay. Well, for those who want to do math, let me give you some numbers. So I did go through it. There was about 14 people. Remember, this is out of 25 on each list. 14 people out of the two-way players that I either played against or I covered. And when I say covered, I think of, I've covered probably almost everybody on these lists in terms of at some point, some mention in an article or something. But when I say covered, I really mean like interviewing them or calling a game in which they were a coach or a player for. That's really how I'm looking at it. So with that being said, there's 14 two-way players that I either played against or I've covered. There's 12 from the pitchers list. There's 17 from the hitters list. And then there's also a few from the non-power four pitchers list, and then 6 from the non-power four hitters list that I've done one or the other with. And you're right, it is a really interesting time because some of them, were my heroes. They were on the Real Dream Team back in 2004 for the Olympic team. And then others I either played with or against or I've covered since I've not been playing, and they're the next generation of this sport. So it is really cool place for me to be just personally for these lists.
Let's get into some of the categories here as I figure out the technology here with the categories there, folks. I just pressed the wrong button, please, sir, for live radio. But uh, let's start. What do you want to start with, Jenna? Which category do you want to start with?
Oh goodness. All right. Well, what do you have right there on screen? That looks like the hitters to me. Oh.
Yeah, we could start. Yeah, we've already released all of them here. I'm waiting, and
Well,
so
let's look at whatever you pull up first.
Okay. Well, good. No pressure. No pressure.
I was gonna say I was gonna say two-way players. Let's start with the two-way
All right. Let's
players.
start with the
Since
two
it,
ways.
yeah.
What stood out to you there from a two-way standpoint so far from the list?
Well, one of the things you mentioned, which is people forget that some of these players were two-way players. You mentioned Danielle Laurie. We think about folks like Ali Carta, who really has focused more on pitching, for example, in her international career since being in college. That was the other thing to keep in mind too. The careers that we're looking at for these players were collegiate. This is the collegiate all quarter century team. So yes, some people went on to do even bigger and better things, afterwards in the Olympics or professionally, et cetera. But some of the players that we see here on the two-way, that's actually a perfect example. Is like if we're looking at some of these UCLA players, I played against Ali Carta my senior year of college. So that's an example of somebody that I played against. But then Amanda Freed, who's a part of that UCLA family, the Bruin bubble, if you will, she's one of the ones who was one of my heroes growing up. And I actually got to fast forward, I think it was 2022, I want to say. I got to call a game with her on Pac-12 networks at Cal. And that was a full circle moment for me. Megan Langenfeld's another one where I played against her. Her screwball just single-handedly won them the World Series that year, it felt like, in addition to her constantly hitting home runs. But that's just one program, one example of, okay, here are the different phases of the game. It was Langenfeld and Carta, and Amanda Freed was earlier, and you can see how the programs have developed in addition to the game itself. And Danielle Laurie, somebody that I played against, and she I think was a little bit underrated for on the hitting side because she was so dominant on the pitching side. Jackie Trina could throw really hard. She could hit the ball really hard too. We played against her in super regionals my junior year. And I think between some of these players that I had the opportunity to actually see in the box and then defend against, Kaylani Ricketts is another one, and I would say Val Arioto is another one. I got to see how they work. I think that's what's really cool because we can look back and take a look at the stats for all of these lists. And we did, right? We're looking at all sorts of parameters and guidelines for us to put this together for all 5 lists. But to have seen it in person and see some of the intangibles that some of these players bring, especially this two-way player list, anyone who's listened to me talk anything media-wise knows that I love a pitcher who rakes. It's one of my favorite things about this game. And so to see these folks specifically get just the love that they deserve, I think is very cool. One other thing that we've talked about, Eric, you and I, 3 JMU players on this list. That was cool to see. Yeah. Very cool to see because you see, okay, people forget, first of all, that Odyssey Alexander was a two-way player. She hit 2 in college. Like, yes, she's focused on her pitching, especially at the end when they had the big push at the World Series, beating Oklahoma, etc. But before her, too, with Megan Good and then Jalen Ford, like there's a lot of talent that comes out of some of these programs that maybe like we don't always piece it together when we're just going based off of whatever's on TV. But that's one of the programs that has the most people represented on this list. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I just had Jalen Ford. I met her this summer at Pros covering the Pro League, and she's playing in Japan. And I joked with her like, "You're still hitting, aren't you?" She's like, "No, they don't really use my bat in Japan." I'm like, "What? Like, do you need some film?" Because I watched. She was a beast in the middle of the lineup. And that was the interesting thing because you're right because we were all thinking, wow, 3 of them is that obsessive? But I remember I even sent everybody the stats like it was eerily similar the stats for all 3 of them like they were warranted that. And I just recorded with Lauren Laporte who I'm in a future episode to talk about her team, and she's got another two-way player coming in this year, obviously with Peyton List. Who just had an all-conference Sunbelt year for them. But that's something they encourage is they want the two-way athletes still over there at JMU. That's part of the recruiting pitch. And they have 3 of the best ever. And so it provides depth. And all 3 had power to all fields and helped their own cause is the deal. So they absolutely warranted it being there with Odyssey getting the team to the World Series in her resume, which is interesting. I mean, it's a fun debate from JMU. Who would you take? But I mean, that's. And then Odyssey's had a great pro career. All of them, really, from Ford and Alexander in particular, have had great pro careers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, and you're right, it is something we discussed. And that's the other part of this that's pretty fun is going back and actually digging into the numbers and going back into more of the details to understand the perception versus, what actually happened on the field, like what actually went down in the record books, etc., was an interesting part for me. I mentioned UCLA, for example, and then, of course, Rachel Garcia, who's we always thought of as sort of the mini Lisa Fernandez during her time collegiately at UCLA. And they are known for that legacy, the pitchers who hit legacy. I mentioned Lisa, Rachel, the other folks on this list. Like it is just something that they do in Westwood. And so seeing that reflected, right? And also reflected in the last 25 years, not just prior to that in the 90s and such when UCLA was so dominant.
And by the way, because I know some people have asked that Lisa Fernandez pitched in the 90s.
Yes.
So that's why she's not on the list. I double-checked that myself. In fairness to some of the audience, I had to do that myself sometimes. Like, wait a minute, did she not pitch?
Right. Right.
So, so I understand why some people would jump out, and that's good. They got to defend their favorite players on there. As I finally figured out, I have the list up for those that are watching it. for those that are listening, I'll mention some of the other names. Ocasio helped Florida to the national championships. Allie Carter and Amanda Freed, you talked about. Scarborough, I mentioned again, very underrated. I think she's become underrated player here, Jenna, because I feel like to some extent she's like kind of the John Madden of softball in that when John Madden was the broadcaster, people forgot he was a great head coach of the Raiders. They won a Super Bowl. I feel at Scarborough, now people just know her because of either the broadcast at ESPN or doing the lessons that she's been doing. That I hope it's one of the goals that I have. And I texted her this. I don't want people to forget that she was an amazing player, even with the
Yes.
injuries that she had.
Yeah, and I will say two things there. One, I think we underestimate the power of the duo that was Amanda Scarborough and Megan Gibson at the time for Texas A&M. That was prior to me actually going and playing in the collegiate level, so it was something that I got to see as, okay, wow, this is what I love, right? The pitchers who rake. But to be able to see them, it wasn't just their abilities on the field either, though. You touched on the other thing I wanted to say, which is the ability for Scarborough to be the teammate that she was. You know, her being such a good teammate while hurt to Megan Gibson, there wasn't ego there, right? She still did what she could to help her team, even when she couldn't physically be on the field and in the circle and in the box for them. So, but I think the duo that they were at the same time, and they're still really good friends to this day, but to think back to that, it's like, wow, that was a really cool team and era that Texas A&M had.
I love that A&M team in '08, in '07 range, '08. They got to the national championship series. Megan Gibson was unbelievable player.
Yeah.
I wish Scarborough was healthy, and she wishes this too. In '08, I think they would have really given Arizona State a run for their money if Scarborough was healthy. May have won it if she was healthy. You're
Yeah,
right. That
they
was a
they
great one too.
hosted Stanford for super regionals that year too, prior to me going to college, but I remember
Okay, I was
watching
gonna
them
say,
all. Yep.
did you go?
No, just watched on
Oh,
TV. I wasn't in college yet. I think I was a senior in high school at that point.
well, you
So
still could
that's
have
what I'm
gone.
saying. It was pretty
Yeah,
formative
yeah.
timing.
They were two tremendous. Charlotte Morgan, I want to mention Alabama. In fact, I just actually talked to her because I'm doing a fall report on Fresno State, the new head coach at Fresno State. An incredible two-way player, one of the greatest hitters in the SEC's history, but also as a pitcher. And she's an example of how that has paid off for her in her coaching career because she has been, at one point or another throughout her coaching career, either a pitching coach or a hitting coach, or both. Now as a head coach, she's going back to being the pitch, working with the pitchers. But like for example, when she was at CSUN the last years or two, she worked with the offense. Now she's working with the pitching. That's an example of the two-way player being versatile as a coach.
Yes. Yes, and some of these folks who have gone on to become coaches in general, like I'm thinking of a Marissa Young too. You know, we know her now because we've covered her so extensively since she has built the Duke program from the ground up, but she was one of the best pitchers in Big Ten history, and she hit too. I think she was the pitcher of the year in the Big Ten back in 2002 and the player of the year in 2003 for context, you know. And so to have that perspective, look how that feeds into being able to be a coach because she can talk with the pitchers in the bullpen, but she can talk with the hitters as well and have those conversations amongst her coaching staff that are actually productive, right? So I just think those types of things, it makes sense why some of these people have gone on to do the amazing things they've done post playing as well.
Marissa Young is definitely another one at the top of the. I had no idea about the two-way
Yeah.
career.
Yeah.
So I was that was one of those like, oh, okay, I get it. Now we know why we wanted the two-way player. Put her on the list, rightfully
Oh
so.
yeah. I don't even
Um,
think we had the two-way player list at first, but then there was just way too much talent. We're like, we got to. It has to have its
it
own.
was
And I'm
yeah,
so glad we
which
did.
it helped because Lauren Hager is a great example because I remember we
Yep.
spent time debating whether should she be a pitcher or a hitter, right? And that's honestly Hager's the reason why we even I think the two-way category somebody brought it up because there was a debate. Well, if you don't have the two-way list, where are you putting Lauren Hager on? Because there was,
Right.
her pitching numbers would suggest she should be on that. But I said, because I covered Hager, I thought of her more as from her bat. She's the greatest, arguably the best power hitter in Florida history in the SEC. Thankfully, we came up with the two-way list, and she was perfect. She's,
Yes.
by the way, being inducted to the Florida Gators Athletics Hall of Fame here in a couple of weeks. So congrats to her.
As
Uh,
she should. As she
absolutely.
should.
Danielle Laurie, did you remember her being as a hitter?
I do. Yes. I mean, she was, I think, it was primarily the pitching, right? Because obviously, look at the way that she has excelled as a pitcher. But you also can't forget she's one of the few who did National Player of the Year not once but twice. And it's not just because of her pitching, right? She was able to contribute to her team and that first and only national championship for Washington in its history in 2009 because she could do it on both sides of the ball. So some of these, one of my favorite questions to ask these types of players is, do you consider yourself a pitcher who hits or a hitter who pitches? And most of the time, they don't pick one or the other. They'll be like, I'm just an athlete. That's what Lisa Fernandez said, right? She's the GOAT. We listen to her. But other than that, some people will also say, well, some days it's one, some days it's the other. It depends on whatever I feel the best in and what I'm able to contribute to the team the most with that particular day. I would say Daniel Laurie might lean a little bit more towards pitching, but that girl had power too. I'm pretty sure I've seen her leave the yard more than once in person while being on the other side, and that wasn't fun. But seeing her and what she's done ever since was definitely very fun.
Let's go quickly through the rest of the list before we move on to the next categories. Kirsten Verdon, some notable from DePaul. Really amazing player, two-way at DePaul. Really up there in their kind of the Mount Rushmore over there with DePaul during the Big East days. Mid-major Danielle Spalding, North Carolina. Part of their
Yep.
glory day in the ACC days. You mentioned Megan Langenfeld, won the national title with the Bruins in 2010. Mel Dumazik, Texas A&M, 3 players
Yep.
on the list, with Dumazik being a
Yep.
part of that list. We mentioned the JMU players. We mentioned Fitch. Jessica Vanderlinden, I want to bring up just because FSU's had so many great pitchers. She was the original one that got them
Yep.
to their first couple World Series under Joanna Graf, the legendary
Yep.
head coach. I was happy to see her on the list, as Tatum Edwards as well from Nebraska, representing, of course, the great Kalani Ricketts. Speaks for itself at OU. Yes, she was. She's probably. Would you say her and Garcia? I mean, for this century, they're
Mm-hmm.
they're in the conversation for best two-way player.
Kaylani Ricketts and Rachel Garcia, I think, have to be in that
That would be
conversation.
right. I feel like
Certainly.
that would be my first 2 picks. I feel like.
Yes. Meaning like closer to equal strength on both sides of the
Yes.
ball, too. Because
Yes.
some were good at both, but definitely leaned one side or the other. Those two genuinely elite at both.
Agreed.
Hard to pick which one they would be better at. Yeah. And I do appreciate you mentioning too some of the Big Ten folks and some of the other regions in the country, right? So Sarah Gronewagen as well for Minnesota being on this list. Tatum Edwards from Nebraska, so some Big Ten love there too. We mentioned Marissa Young as well, but that's something that I think is pretty cool too, because if we were to look at this for the last quarter century, it would not be as dispersed as it is now across the country with different programs and the growth that we've seen throughout this sport. So very cool to see.
Ariota was amazing to Cal, and was reminded she still did pitch a little bit along with that magical bat she had.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
she was a year ahead of me.
was she
She was
really?
tough. Yeah, faced her for 3 years. Actually, I want to say, did she might have redshirted too at some point, so I might have faced her for 4 years. And yes, she could hit the ball very far. Like she had power in the box, but then you'd see her. So I think of her as a hitter, especially if I'm playing third base
Is
at
she
that
the
point.
strongest? Is she the strongest hitter you ever went up? I mean, when I saw her play up close, and granted, it was her closer to the pro days, international days. I was just
Hmm.
like, she's one of those like you would pay to watch her batting practice.
Oh, totally. She's totally one of those. Yes. I mean, she was strong. Ricketts also very strong.
Yes.
Langenfeld. Like there are some who have just a ton of just strength. I mentioned Jackie Trina earlier too when it comes to that. That's where the power comes from. So it's like not only are they able to put that on the ball, barrel it up, but they're able to leave the yard also. That's what's crazy about this list. And then I know Valerie Cagle is a more recent one, right? That everybody knows, a National Player of the Year, and some ACC love, some East Coast love there too. That's one of the reasons I loved watching her, right? Like I will always and forever be fans of pitchers who rake, always.
Well, that's a good segue there, Jenna. So we're going to go from the two-way players to the rake to the best rakers, period, and the hitters. And this, I think we could share, was probably the most controversial in that, boy, we were debating a lot of different things because when it comes to hitters, there's so many different aspects of it to tackle it from. Like you have the slap hitters versus power hitters. How do you evaluate that on a list like this and
Right.
determine what's a great hitter or not? And we went back. Would you agree this was the toughest one of all of them? I mean, they're all tough,
I
but
think I think
this
so.
one's tough. Yes.
I think so because the two-way player list, having that list opened it up for pitchers, right? Like we were able to um recognize even more pitchers where it's like, oh, well, they weren't really a two-way player, but you know what? They were one of the best pitchers, just POs, let's say, let's call them, right? This was definitely hard. This was really hard because it's like what parameters do you look at, right? Because this is not a players list. Also, this is a hitters list, specifically hitting. So we're not talking about play in the field as much as I love defense and would love for that to be something that we focus on as well. This is specifically looking at the hitters. So with that in mind, you look at power numbers, right? Home runs are obvious to look at, RBIs, and then you can even expand that to slugging, etc. But then when you look at runs scored, on base percentage, stolen bases from some of the slappers, some of the fast ones on this, like a Caleb Rowe, for example, who I also played against. I played third base in super regionals as a junior when she was up slapping from the left side. So we got to talk about that a little bit when I had her on the Believe in Softball podcast. Those are some of the most fun matchups that you can have, right? Especially in those types of environments. So I loved being able to see somebody like her on this list. But then we also see someone who else I played against, like a Brittany Lestraps, who I saw her, I think, clear the scoreboard in Tucson more than once when we were down there. I mean, it was crazy to see just the power that that entire lineup had around her as well. So Caitlin Lowe's obviously one of the, if not the blueprint slapper, I would say, that exists for softball in this last quarter century. I mean, she's the one that I think most others would model their game after, right? So again, to see the balance of both, super interesting. Jessie Harper, Mia Davidson, those are the home run hitters, right? Their averages might not be quite as high as some other hitters, but their home runs were through the roof, their RBIs were through the roof. Mia Davidson has the SEC home run record, right? So this was extremely tough. But I think it's not so much that the ones on this list, there's anyone that you think might not deserve it. It's just the list could be so much longer if we really wanted it to be.
There would be probably 15, 20 we left out that you could have made a
Oh
case.
yeah,
Like
easily.
that I'm not even being. And then it was unique because then you have a couple of cases like Kelly Kretschmann and Stacey Newman, who
Right.
didn't only played I think 2 or 3 years tops this century, but they were still so good in that limited time that that was one of the other discussions we had as a staff. We're like, no, they're I know it wasn't I want to paraphrase one of the quotes, but it was like I know they didn't play a long time this century, but the time they did play in college was still good enough to be on this list.
Well, yeah, and they still did play during the quarter century, right? So
Sure.
they did overlap a little bit. It just wasn't all 4 years that they were able to say that, okay, yes, I played in this quarter century. But, those are two of the greatest of all time at every level. Stacey Newman having owned the home run record before the home run queens that we've known in more recent years, right? And somebody who went to the Olympics multiple times, Kelly Kretschmann, how long she played in the pro league. Again, these lists are really based on the collegiate performance that they had, but that was the foundation for everything that they did after that. And those two are just complete icons. Like I don't think there's a Jocelyn Allo without a Stacey Newman coming first, for example. So and you got to have her. You have people like Tiari Jennings and then Lauren Chamberlain, who is in there as well, prior to Allo breaking her record with the home runs. It's just they all continued the path for the next one, which is I think at the end of the day, what everyone can agree on is a priority.
Shelby Penley, another Sooner, was paired up with Chamberlain. That great combination, Chamberlain and Penley.
Yep.
They were kind of like the Ruth and Garrick at times were called during their times there at OU, and of course Jennings, who was kind of the quiet one following Allo, had an incredible career. I don't think neither one of us would be surprised if Tiari's in the Olympic team in 2028. But it was also, we mentioned the cool thing about having Newman, Kretschmann, a Veronica Nelson, who I know you
Yes.
were a very big proponent of. Remembering some of the players from the early part of the decade in the 2000s and in this century.
Yes. I mean, I think she has the NCAA record for walks too, or
Yeah,
she set it during her time, nearly 400 career walks. And she had over 100 in a season. I think that was
yeah.
in 2002 and 2003, but she was a part of that national championship team for Cal. And I think that that's an element that can strike you too as you look through some of these lists is, we look at the numbers, of course, and you can see people standing on their own, but some of these players were such huge impacts to their program to get the first and only national championship for Cal, for example, in 2002. Veronica Nelson was a part of that. We mentioned Daniel Laurie for the two-way players in that same regard, right? Like these are people where that really there's a championship pedigree there as well, on top of just looking at their stats and looking at their numbers and the individual accolades that they have. And Veronica Nelson's one of them. You can't forget her. There's a few like that. I actually think, Caitlin Cochran and Caitlin Boyd, those are two hitters that I faced. They could hit, man. They could rake. They could swing it. They were, I think, a little bit underrated, especially Caitlin Boyd. Katie Cochran actually got some recognition, having been part of, I think it was at least the '08 national championship. And then Caitlin Boyd was a part of 2011 alongside Dallas Escobedo. It was during that era. But Boyd is someone who was kind of a quiet, silent assassin almost. Like, she played shortstop. She was solid. She was an Arizona girl who went and played at ASU. But if you go back and look at her numbers, you're like, whoa, these are even better than I remember. I just remember like playing against her and knowing we got to be like really on our toes here for this hitter who's up right now. But when you go back and look, I think those two have been a little bit underrated. So I was glad to see them make the list too.
Yeah. And I remember, I'm glad you brought up, I think you were the one that brought up Boyd in our
Yeah.
chat, and they were like, oh yeah, that's a good call. Good call. Batting
Yeah.
champion there. Good call on that with her, Boyd and Cochran there. And then Sierra Romero, unbelievable career at Michigan, maybe the greatest Wolverine ever, maybe the best hitter in Big Ten softball history. She's certainly in the conversation for that.
Yep.
Mentioned Caleb Bro, maybe in the conversation for best slap hitter of all time. Now an assistant at Alabama. She's on the list. There, worthy. Savannah Jakewish, awesome hitter at LSU. The great Natasha Watley, who was an amazing all-around player, but certainly a hitter. And it was funny. I texted with Watley, and I'm like, she's like, wow, I'm honored to be on this list. I'm like, I feel like this list would be not valid if you weren't on it. And she was appreciative of that. But again, I don't know if this was our goal of ours, but I think we kind of wanted to mix in. We didn't want it to be too recent, but also not too like all about the early There's a balance, because this is really the century where the sport has exploded, and it's a good thing that we have this problem. But we try to mix in some of the players from the early century that helped pave the way, like you mentioned, for some of the players in the most recent history decade.
Yeah, that's why it's such a big deal to really make a list like this, because of it's 25 years of talent that we're looking at. And yes, everybody has their 4 years and there might be some overlap, but the game has evolved quite a bit, but the talent has always been there. And so how do you avoid recency bias, but also make sure you give credit where credit's due, right? And so it was an interesting process, to say the least. And actually going through this too, it made me realize this was the list where it was the most people I played against or covered media wise. And Amanda Lorenz, we can't talk enough about her. She's obviously on this list. She's somebody
You know
that we
her?
work with at D1 softball. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right. She's an obvious one. She's probably one of, if not the best hitter in the world right now, right? Like, that is right now. But during her time at Florida, a 4-time All-American, like, some of these are obvious, right? In a lot of ways. But then I actually went back and looked, and I was like, oh my goodness, I did play against Madison Shipman and Shelby Penley. This was when Shelby Penley was at Arizona her freshman year before transferring over to Oklahoma, for example. And just for the record, we did beat Tennessee when we played them. I did play Madison Shipman, I will say.
Wow. Do you bring this up to her when you run into her? Do you bring this up?
No.
Okay.
I actually didn't even remember that we specifically played against each other in that game. I had to look at the box score, and I was like, wow, yeah, there it is. This was in a preseason tournament in Vegas. And let's just say they did end up going to the World Series, and I did not during my career. So take that as you will.
But you got the bragging rights of the winning individual.
Of that game, sure.
Like one game. I'm sure she'll appreciate that when we get her on. You need to get her on and talk about that game. She was fantastic. SEC Player of the Year and commentator. She's on the list. Lorenz, you mentioned, obviously, your co-host on D1. I've told her this. I call her the best hitter in the world, playing off of course, you know me long enough now, Jenna, about my wrestling gimmicks. I like usage of words. I like to use, like, CM Punk's my favorite wrestler, best wrestler in the world, right? That's his best in the world. I feel she's the best hitter in the world. She is one of a handful of players that I can honestly tell you, Jenna, having covered, because I covered her entire Florida career, where I would cover her games, and I would be genuinely shocked when she made an out. Like, there's only a handful of players everybody's a great hitter, but there's only a handful of players. You know you're good when people are shocked that you made an out. And she's in that category for me, because I was I would leave calling a UCF Florida game on the bus back, like, wow, she didn't get a hit. What? Of course, we
Yeah.
walked like 3 times because we weren't pitching to
Right.
her, but
Right.
that's how good she is.
Yeah. And she's from the 805 as well. That
There
is
you go.
Ventura County. That's where I'm from. And speaking of that, I'd be remiss, obviously, if I didn't specifically call out Jessica Mendoza, who is from my hometown, Camarillo, California, which is in the 805. But just one of those pure players, right? Like obviously we all know her from her broadcasting, especially the World Series now for the better part of 2 decades at this point, the Olympics, but she was a part of, I don't think people realize that it was the late 90s when Stanford even established a varsity program for softball. So some of these programs are celebrating 50 seasons, right? Arizona, even Utah, some of these Mizzou. But Stanford didn't have a varsity program until the late 90s, and that was really close to when she decided to go to Stanford. And it was her and Sarah Beeson, who just got inducted into the Hall of Fame at Stanford, and Dana Sorensen, who we'll get to, and she's a GM in the AUSL. So she's just what she did in terms of all the records she holds and things like that at Stanford gets her on the list. But then again, you think of that larger impact, and she's a no-brainer as well.
Mendoza, I think I've told you this, was my favorite player on that 04, and I call that 04 team the Dream Team because they were on the Sports Illustrated cover. And
They are the real dream team. That's what it said. Yeah.
Yes. My favorite player ever. And I covered her pro career because she played in Florida with the Pride and everything.
Yep.
And I've had her on the podcast many a time. She's been fantastic and talked to her. Still, and I've done over, I don't know, 900 whatever plus episodes. We've had God knows, probably over 600-700 guests, I would estimate. She is still one of the few that every time I get her on the pod, I'm still nervous. I'm still intimidated by her. I'm in awe. Like, I admit that because she just has this presence. And you've been around her, and there's a presence that she has. She carries herself well, but she's been an incredible ambassador for the sport, even when, all this time through the Olympics and the pros and the college game. I'm just always in awe. Of course, she's best friends with Coach Ball Malone, who obviously I cover a lot at UCF, so I've heard a lot of many stories.
Another Camarillo girl, another 805er.
Shout
Just
out.
saying.
We'll mention her later. But, I'm in awe. Like, she's one of the still. Like, I get, ooh, I'm in awe. I'm nervous. Like, it's kind of like your idol, like, almost, or your favorite player. That's Jessica Mendoza for me.
Well, yeah, and then some people, we could go on and on about people who just missed this list in our view, right?
Oh.
But like I think of a Jessica Mendoza, and then she was an outfielder, but from the hitting perspective on the left side through righty, of course. Then you fast forward to during my time, Ashley Hansen, right? And she was somebody who it's like you could consider her on this list. Not a ton on the home run side of things, but the 2011 National Player of the Year, 2-time All-American. Like she was the newcomer of the year and the player of the year and the defensive player of the year, actually, at one point in the Pac-12. And there, again, if you don't have the Jessica Mendozas, you're not going to get the Ashley Hansens later on in the program. So another foundational piece, of course, to just college softball with Jessica.
Maya Brady on this list. Good family there of athletics.
And Tom Brady did say she's the most athletic one in the family. I will forever quote that.
Well, don't forget Maya's mom, though. I believe, what is it? Maya's mom, I think, played.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Pitcher.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pitcher, indeed. On that. So I think that covers everybody we mentioned. Kristen Rivera is a great player, maybe the best hitter overall in Washington history.
Yes.
With 4-time All-American. And only one at Washington. Then, yeah, you mentioned all the rest of them. So let's move on to the next categories here, which is the pitchers, actually. Let's get to the pitchers then. The power pitchers. Woo! Which, again, not easy. But big time list. I'll mention some names here. Alicia Hollowell of Arizona, Taryn Mowat of Arizona, Jordan Taylor of Michigan, Angela Tincture of Virginia Tech, Jordy Ball gets on this list because, as you mentioned earlier, only 1 year where she's been a full-time two-way player.
Correct. 3 years to her career, 2 of them in Oklahoma. She wasn't a hitter. It was a very small amount of at-bats that she had. So the majority of her career, having played on both sides, was not there in terms of requirements. But, those 2 natties, okay, she's definitely one of the best pitchers. So here she is.
Correct. She's one of 3 pitchers, by the way, active on this list with Jordy Ball, Harlan Pickens, 2-time SEC Pitcher of the Year, and Nyjah Kennedy. I think you're familiar. My friend, Nyjah Kennedy, is on this list as well. So interesting, we have 3 active players on this list in this, with Katie Burkhardt of Arizona State, Chelsea Thomas of Missouri, Sheridan Hawkins of Oregon, Kira Gore of UCLA, one of the old timers there in the early 2000s, Lacey Waldrop, who just got inducted to the Florida State Athletics Hall of Fame, National Player of the Year. And then let's Dana Sorensen, there's your plug right there. You mentioned earlier Eileen Canny of Northwestern, Hannah Rogers of Florida, Montana Fouts of Alabama, Monica Abbott, Tennessee, Jenny Ritter helped Michigan win that 05 national title. Jocelyn Forrest, you and Courtney Deifel were both big proponents of Jocelyn Forrest. Courtney actually reached out and said, you make sure you have her on the list? And like, okay, I'll support it. Because she caught her. She would know. Jolene Henderson of Cal. Yep. Paige Parker of Oklahoma, Stacey Nelson. What jumps out to you about this list?
Ooh, so many different things. I just, again, these are the ones who were not on the two-way player list. I'm just reiterating that again for everybody as we're looking at all 5 of these lists. But, when you had asked me before too, how many people that I played against, and with the pitchers in particular, it's interesting because when you say, oh, I played against them, you face them in the box, right? When they're in the circle. So Sheridan Hawkins, she was that lefty. Dallas Escobedo, I mentioned. The rise ball was just, I was going to say through the roof, next level, but, pun intended, I guess, with that in that situation. Jolene Henderson was a year behind me. She's now in the Hall of Fame at Cal, now on staff at Stanford as an assistant coach. And then Jordan Taylor I actually faced in high school because we're both from Southern California. We faced each other in CIF. She played in Valencia. I was at Westlake High School. And so it was cool to see her, also see people who are from where you're from kind of go on and do what they did in the collegiate ranks. So those obviously stand out to me, having actually faced them directly. But I would say, in addition to that, the obvious folks are here, like a Kat Osterman, a Monica Abbott, Dana Sorensen, who we've gotten to know even more in terms of recent fans through the AUSL, being the GM for the Blaze, for example. And then you look at Jordy Ball, Kennedy Pickens, kind of the newer ones. So people are familiar with them. Montana Fouts being on here, Paige Parker, and Tara Moa. And I think Taryn, too, in particular, not only did she win the back-to-back natties, we all know that she went, every single pitch, every single inning in her postseason push. I think what was so cool about that in particular is her being an ESPY winner, too. So the crossover to the mainstream, if you will. We saw Jenny Finch do that in her career in a general sense. Seeing Taryn Moat get that recognition across sports, not just within softball, I think was also big for the sport at that time. And that was still a very then Pac-10 heavy landscape when it came to the World Series, national titles, etc. And then it's only grown and dispersed throughout the country from there. But I just think that's another one where the impact from what she did, not only her accomplishments on the field, really, grew this game at the end of the day.
Well, and I'll back you up on that because I'm one of them. I've told Taryn and I've told Monica this. My first World Series that I ever watched, okay, because I really started following softball consistently in 07. Like I would casually pick it, watch a little 04. Like the first softball game I ever went to was in 04 when I watched Jessica Van der Linden and FSU play Stephanie Best and UCF. But I was more as a fan. It wasn't like, hey, I started broadcasting some stuff in 07. But the first World Series I ever watched was 07. And that was the Moat Abbott Champ Series, Tennessee, Arizona, which is still one of the most watched softball games ever in the history of the World Series. And it really grabbed people like me. And I know I've talked to a lot of young players, even when I've had them on the podcast. Moat's a name that pops up because she influenced a lot of young pitchers that weren't tall. Yes. You didn't have to be super tall to be a superstar pitcher in college softball. You could be a 5'7". And I really blew me away. Her impact is still felt to this day because of that. And of course, Monica is Monica. It speaks for itself. But like that really drew a lot of eyeballs. I thought that was the World Series. I know some might argue Michigan, UCLA 2 years earlier, but I would say that series, Tennessee, Arizona, was the beginning of the explosion of the softball interest on television.
I think that's fair to say. I really do. And you're right. The idea that you don't have to be a certain size, shape, etc. to be elite at something she was key for that. I mean, Lisa Fernandez is not the tallest person either, right? And she had the impact that she had as a player. And then to see people continue to do that. So I know that's something specifically that Amanda Scarborough talks about just in her efforts in terms of pitching instruction, for example. That's a big deal. And you'll even hear like Kat's such a huge name. She's a lefty, right? But her not throwing a million miles an hour was a big deal too, because she just had the movement and she committed. She only has really three pitches. She'll tell you, she'll talk through it. She really only has like the curveball, the drop ball. She can throw the off speed, but she can throw a rise ball. So maybe 3.5 if you want to get technical. But she will tell you it's not all about just how hard you can throw. You have to be able to tunnel pitches, the movement. So seeing someone like her, and then you have someone like Abbott who had just the absolute, she prior to Pickens overtaking the fastest pitch ever thrown, that was Monica Abbott, right? And that's what she was known for, and the rise balls, etc. To see both of them, and they were both from similar eras, that's really cool. They're both lefties, sure, but very different styles of pitching and still both incredibly successful. And so to see a Taramoa and others who maybe changed what the status quo look like a little bit for these athletes and for generations that came after them, that's a big deal.
Kat, you can make the argument, maybe the most recognizable, her, maybe, and Jenny Finch, maybe the two most recognizable names in the sport of softball, where every time I've asked a young player, a pitcher in particular, who do you look up to, those two names come up a lot, even today.
Well, Jenny Finch was Montana Fouts' hero.
Yes.
Right? And that doesn't mean that she did the exact same path going to Arizona, etc. Sure. But still was her role model to then create her own path, right? Which took her to Alabama, and now she's a professional champion too with the AUSL Talents in its first inaugural season. Yes. So that's really what it is too, I think. Just because someone's your hero doesn't mean you have to do exactly what they did. They're inspiring you to then take your path that you're meant to take and carve it out yourself. And it's not like, oh, I want to be the next Jenny Finch. It's like, well, I want to be the first Montana Fouts, right? And so on and so forth as the generations continue.
It's wild too, because I've been around Kat in person, and it's wild because people just flock to her.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then, she needs her privacy, folks. Like, it's wild. Like this past year, she was at the UCF Oklahoma State. She called the game nationally. And I had to make sure she get out of, get in, get out, easily. But, there were still people, I'm a fan. I'm like, oh, boy. She handles it great. She's unbelievable. And Monica's been great, too, on this list. It's just an incredible list. Barton Hill, a great Florida Gator. Just mentioned her real quick. And then Escobedo and Burkhart. You talked about both of them in Arizona State. Boy, they got a good pedigree over there in Tempe there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, don't forget they have two national championships, 08 and 2011, like, and those two were the catalyst between those two. I think another one, you mentioned Jocelyn Forrest. Yes, I was definitely a proponent of having her on this list for some of the reasons that Deifel already mentioned. Part of that 2002 championship too. One of the pitchers that I think gets overlooked sometimes, which you think about it, and you're like, how is that possible? Kira Girl at UCLA, because she had two national titles there, but like UCLA has the most national titles, right? So there's so much talent that comes out of that program, but she's the only pitcher to throw a no-hitter in a World Series championship game. I just think sometimes we forget just how great she was. So she's on this list, of course. And then another one is Eileen Canny. So speaking of giving some love to the Big Ten and other regions throughout the country, I mean, she was fun to watch. She was one of my favorites to watch. And again, that was during a time, she was a freshman in 2004. That was during a time where it was so Pac-12 heavy. But then Northwestern goes to the World Series during her tenure, and they have that pocket of purple in Oklahoma City cheering them on. And it was led by people like Eileen Canny, right? So I just think wanted to give her a specific shout out as well.
Very good. Stacey Nelson really, has there's a section at the softball stadium named after her. That tells you all you need to know what she means to Tim Walton and the Florida Gators program.
That's right. And Hannah Rogers was shortly after. I played
helped
Florida
them win the
right
national
in
title.
Between.
Yeah,
yes,
win the national title in 2014. Like, really, that's why she definitely deserved on this list. I mentioned earlier the three active players: Pickens, Kennedy, Jordy. There was a debate about whether we should include active players or not. Right? That was another one we discussed. We decided to do that, and we decided these three because I don't think you could, and I was for it because I don't think you could tell the story of college softball this century without those three and what they've contributed to this point.
Nigel Kennedy not being on a list just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't. And then Jordy with her two national championships. I mean, Carlin having had the SEC Pitcher of the Year honors as well as the fastest pitch ever thrown, right? Those types of things, like those three, the fact that they're all in the same class as well, like this senior class that we're about to see in 2026 is mind-boggling in so many ways. So you think ahead to the pro league, etc. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, right? They're still finishing out their careers. But you had to be just incredibly special to be an active player on this list. We didn't have any for the hitters, for example. It was just these three pitchers because their impact is that big.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to think of it. The only other, I think Reese Atwood came up as an active player, possibly on the hitters list, but we decided it just didn't have enough business for. Again, not an easy list to cut down to 25 per category, but that was a very lively conversation, one of many we had on there. Two more categories, real quick. Non-power four pitcher, and we broke this down. One of the reasons we did this, there was so much talent, but I think we all agree we wanted to give some love and showcase the non-power conference programs because there's been a lot of talent there, and we didn't want to try to figure out power conference players versus non-power conference, get into all that minutia, which gets again. So this was kind of a way to again showcase more players. What'd you think of the non-power four categories, pitchers and hitters?
I thought there were a few call-outs where I'm like, okay, I played against them, and yeah, that's legit. I'm very glad that they ended up on these lists. For example, not only have I been personally victimized by Keilani Ricketts, I also have faced her sister, Stephanie Ricketts, when she played for Hawaii. So fun fact, my sophomore year actually at Stanford, we started our season in Hawaii. We actually beat them. I think it was 2-0, if I remember correctly. That was opening weekend back in 2010. Fast forward to the postseason. This was at a time when Hawaii, I mean, they ended up going to the World Series, right? So they had actually earned a national seed, but they weren't going to host because that's too far for everyone to travel, et cetera. So we ended up hosting, even though they were the number one seed, the top seed in the region. So then we faced them in the regional, and that's actually how we ended our season as well in 2010. And that was going up against Stephanie Ricketts. So the Ricketts dynasty that exists in softball, I think is some people recognize it and everything, but I think maybe a little bit underrated too, because Keilani is certainly like probably the biggest name and the biggest face in that family, but there's a ton of talent as well, and Stephanie belongs in that category.
Rough life starting your softball season in Hawaii. That's
I know. We told the freshmen that year too, we were like, don't get used to this. This isn't normal, guys. We're not coming to Hawaii every year.
Of course, the third Ricketts, Samantha Ricketts, current head coach of Mississippi State. We also had her under consideration for the hitters list, but again, long list. Tony Paisley, Angel Shamblin. I want to bring them both shout outs. 3-time CUSA pitchers. I covered both of them. What an era of CUSA softball at its peak, where there was a 3 to 4 bid league. Which is why my friend like Allison Kime didn't win a Pitcher of the Year award. I think Justin was like, well, why did she win one? Well, because they ran into Angel Shamblin. That's why. But they were tremendous there. Summer Ellison of Louisiana, Jessica Mullins, Texas State, Lindsay Schuinar, who just got inducted into the DePaul Hall of Fame, Tara Altman of Creighton as well. Jamie Southern, Fresno State, helped them win the national title there back when Fresno was a powerhouse there.
Well, and that's Fresno State and Fullerton, the two non-power programs that have won national championships. They just have such a history. I'm just reiterating that as we're also educating,
That's why we do this. Hannah Campbell, South Alabama, led them to Super Regional. Shelby Turner, who I covered at UCF. For those that are UCF fans, have been asking me why just Shelby. Well, first of all, you can't put everybody in. One of the distinctions that we try to help in trying to figure this out is, were you an All-American? Did you win Pitcher of the Year? Shelby checked multiple of those boxes, where some of the other greats like a Mackenzie Otis, even an Aaliyah White, or even more recently a Sarah Willis, did not check all those boxes as an example there. So just to clear that for those. Georgina Corrick, Sarah Nevins, South Florida. Corrick, you might, right? Could you say that Corrick right now is in the conversation for maybe best pitcher in the world as far as the sport right now?
She was incredibly impressive during the pro season. this year. During the regular season, I think she was far and away in terms of her stats compared to all the other pitchers across the league in the AUSL, for example. She's one of, I love seeing the players too, where we talk about this a lot. This is why we're such proponents of there being a viable pro league, especially in the States, is because most players, most women do not peak in college. If they get to continue to play, they get to be even better. And somehow Georgina Corrick, despite her incredibly successful collegiate career, is one of those people who has done that professionally and beyond. But I think some people could even argue that she should just be on the pitchers list, not even the non P4 list, on just the straight up pitchers list too. And I would listen to that argument because she had such an impact. Randy Rupp's another one too, who obviously played under Kat when she was a coach at Texas State. They got to play together in Athletes Unlimited. Really unusual to be able to get to do that when Kat came out of retirement training for the Olympics. But she was another one. One other one from Louisiana that I would mention, Ashley Brignac. So she's another one who ended not only my season, or she helped, but my career. So we went to regionals my senior year at Louisiana, and actually the atmosphere was incredible. Going to Lafayette, seeing them tailgating our softball games was pretty awesome. But I was glad to see her on this list too, because I remember us going up against her. We played them a couple times in the regional, and they ultimately moved on to supers and went to ASU, and then ASU continued on to the World Series. But she's another one too, where I was like, wow, yeah, I remember, when you compete against somebody, again, you get that extra sort of context as to who they were as a player that goes beyond just what's in a box score. So
I'm learning a lot about your playing career, which is fun. That's why I'm enjoying this a lot. Amy Krager, Tulsa was tremendous with their John Barfield and those teams. Nicole Newman was now an assistant at FAU, was obviously led Drake to dominate the Valley days. Nikki Myers dominant with those Joan Joyce teams at FAU. Olivia Galati, Hofstra, when they went away from the World Series. Sydney Ball, we both know, was a two-way player. Had a case to be a two-way player. As I think I told her when she asked me about why did I get the pitcher list in the two-way, I'm like, I think you had 1 year where you didn't hit well at all, and that cost you. Sorry.
Savage.
But she led Pacific to within one win of making it to the World Series. She shut out Stanford, but of course they had to play the if necessary game. She gave up a grand slam to her best friend, Jessica Mendoza. I think you know the story where they both grew up together. Mendoza was her personal catcher.
They went to Camarillo High School together. Yep.
100%. And the irony of all ironies is between them and Stanford would move on. That great Stanford team. I think that was your first World Series Stanford team too. I think 01.
01, yep.
I remember this because John Rittman was the one that told me this story when I met him many years ago when he was playing when Clemson opened their program up against you in the UCF tournament. He told me this exact story of this game. And I've relayed this to all parties since. Cindy's not a big fan of remembering the Grand Slam part.
Well, sure.
But she's another example. She was a two-way player. She has been a pitching coach at Washington on the U.S. national team and now currently runs the staff at UCF. But when she got to UCF and when she was at Boise, she helped run the offense. Again, the benefits of being a two-way.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And that, and not only to be a coach as a two-way, to be the head coach, right? Yeah, to run a program. Exactly. We talked about the same thing with Marissa Young. Same thing applies for Cindy Ball Malone. And a fun fact, her and Gina Carbonado, who's the head coach at Santa Clara, the only two who have had their jersey numbers retired in Pacific program history. Those two right there.
Good stat, yeah. Brian Cozy, now retired.
On
there. Very proud of both
of
them.
And Heather Tarr was a coach on that side. That was very much a coaching, a learning ground for coaches to move on in their careers too. Heather Tarr that's how she started her career prior to going to Washington and her alma mater, right? And leading it since then. And there have been others since as well. So very cool. Underrated program, I think, in the grand scheme, Pacific.
Yes, no doubt. Which ironically is where Kalani Ricketts right now is a pitching coach there.
That's right.
It's all full circle there. Courtney Coppersmith, also during the UMBC days, making the NCAA tournament. So that is Jen Manu for them. You can check out the list on D1 Softball. Last category, non-Power 4 hitters. Notable names, Addison Barnard of Wichita State, Carly Spade of Miami, Ohio, who's up there in career home runs. Kelly Majam of Hawaii, you know very well, from the Hawaii program. Kristen Zaleski, who's currently the assistant at Texas. maybe the best hitter in Texas State softball history. I think that argument's there. April Setterlin of Boston, Amanda Williams, one of my favorites from Marshall, played a great career, long-time career in the NPF, beautiful lefty-handy swing. Bailey Vanoy of Charlotte, Lexi Elkins of Louisiana, Megan Baltzel of Longwood, Danielle Gomez of Louisiana, Erica Pescatelli of McNeese, who's been on the Italian national team, Megan Choli, who's now Megan Bartlett, Arizona State head coach. When Notre Dame was in the Big East, Jenna, that was a mid-major. It was not a power conference back then when Notre Dame was a Big East. So that's why she's on. That's something people have asked. She's on that list. Gina Oakes, who's now the head coach at Fullerton, entering her second year, was a great player there at Fullerton. Hitter Olikia Hoho, who was an amazing player at BYU, one of many talented players that Gordon Eakin has developed over there at BYU.
Yes.
Holly Spears, Kent State, best player in Kent State history. Rachel Folden, who's with the Cubs organization as we speak, unbelievable hitter. And Marshall there, another Marshall. And then you could argue certainly Morgan Zirkle has been brought. It could be a snub, you could argue, from this category. Otherwise, they could have had three. Rachel Roop, who we just saw from Liberty, fantastic. Ivy Drake of Georgia State. Jenna Cohn at GW when they dominated. Sam Fisher, who's Loyola Marymount. Shelly Robinson, who's the head coach at Stetson, was a two-time ASUN Player of the Year at USC Upstate. Jenny Gilbert, Ball State, amazing, talented player. Jenny Topping, we just had on the pod. She's reunited with Laura Berg and the staff at Oregon State. They played together in the 04 Dream Team. Awesome player at Fullerton.
Who also, would have been, had Laura Berg played in this quarter century, right?
Yes.
She did not. She was in the 90s, just reiterating that as well.
I reminded Laura of that when I sent her this list. I'm like, listen, you're not on this list because you're not eligible. Otherwise, we would.
Yes.
That's what I thought. But Topping was amazing.
Topping was awesome. And I actually got to have her on the Believe in Softball podcast this past season. My kind of goal that I didn't even know I had in the beginning with that podcast was I want to try to interview everyone that was a part of that 2004, the real dream team that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. So Jenny was one of those, and getting to talk with her and get her perspective, not only from her playing days, of course, obviously Olympian, one of the best, if not the best out of Cal State Fullerton ever. All of those things, but also now her coaching perspective and how she takes what she learned into her career. And the fact that her and Bergie are going to get to be, new teammates in a way on the same coaching staff once again, it's awesome. But I remember her saying that when they would do planning, when she was on staff at Fullerton before making the move to Oregon State, they would take a look at some of the biggest threats offensively on the teams that they were going up against in the scout. And if someone was really difficult to defend, essentially, they would say like, oh, she's a Jenny. Yeah, she's a tough one. She's a Jenny, like a Jenny Topping, because that's just how tough she was. And so seeing her, covering her was great. Erica Piancastelli is another one that I got to interview on the podcast. Sydney McKinney is a great one as well. And we see them still playing professionally, right, with Athletes Unlimited. Sam Fisher is somebody who we actually played together. I don't think I ever played against her in college, but we played together on our very first travel ball team ever when we were 11 years old. The team was called 3D. It stood for Destined to Dominate the Diamond. So looking back, that's hilarious. And this was in Ventura County. Sammy's also someone who's from the 805, so I got to give that credit. So getting to see, people from where I'm from have the success that they had was pretty cool. It was very cool to see. And so she's been on the podcast. And then Amanda and I actually on the D1 softball podcast got to interview Rachel Roop after her iconic quote, which is just do what I do best and hit dingers after Liberty with their upset over A&M and the run that they had in the postseason this year. So some really cool names, both recent and not so recent, that I'm glad that we were able to give them this recognition.
Yeah, Stephanie Best, UCF, the all-time leads pretty much the entire offensive categories over there at UCF. Big-time standout player there. And, again, talented list. And it shows the explosion of softball, not just beyond the power conferences where all the mid-major conferences there. And that list proves it out. And, I mean, Megan Bartlett, I know you've had her on the pod as well.
Yep.
I think it was cool that people realized what a great player she was at Notre Dame.
Yeah. And again, you said it, like the different regions throughout the country that are represented here. I think it just speaks very much to the growth of the sport. And we have a long way to go that we want to go, right? But like, it's incredible just over the last 25 years how that's gone.
I'm many of the Dream Team have you interviewed?
So I think last I looked, so there's 15 on a roster, right?
Yeah, yeah.
15 total players for the Olympics, which is small compared to today's college rosters.
Oh,
But
don't get me started. I've ranted in the past about how we need to increase the roster, but that's
oh
okay.
yeah, that's a whole other series, right? That we could get into. I want to say I might be at like 10 now. I'd have to double check.
I
But
just had Topping, who was my 10th. I'm at 10
yes,
right now. Yes.
yes, yeah, Topping, she's great. I mean, there's the few like a Lori Harrigan I have not talked to, Lovey Jung. There's a few like that. But for the most part, yeah, the rest of them, which is pretty cool.
Ooh, so you and I are in a race to see who can complete the set. That's okay. You and I are gonna have to go. We're gonna talk off the air about this. That's an
I thought we
interesting
were
project.
teammates, Eric. I thought we were
We
teammates.
are, but we're both competitive human beings. Let's be real. I mean, let's not act like you're as competitive. Don't be fool. Couple things before I let you go. Snubs. Obviously, it's never
Mm,
a perfect list. Doesn't exist. There's gonna be players that pick whatever category you want. Give me a player or two. You're like, hey, let me raise my cup here. This is a player that certainly should be recognized, even though didn't make the list. So give me some players here that jumps out to you.
sure. I don't know if I would quite categorize it as a snub, but people where I think there's absolutely an argument
There you
for
go.
them. Yes, definitely have a few of mine. I know I mentioned Ashley Hansen earlier as somebody for the hitters list specifically. Also has some records in terms of doubles and triples and things in the program too. Another one where it's interesting. So we obviously have Oklahoma representation, and for the hitters specifically, if you look at Shelby Penley, who made the list, and then you look at Shea Knighton, for example, they have pretty similar accolades and national championships, etc. Shelby has more home runs, but how do we incorporate clutchness, right? Shea had the not only the World Series tournament honors, but she was the 2017 most outstanding player for the World Series. So, and we all know like the iconic moments that she has had. She's like Miss OKC, right? Like, that's an interesting one to me where I could absolutely see an argument there for Shea Knighton to possibly be a part of the conversation. One other one who was interesting to me too, and this was a Big Ten representative, it would have been Sam Marder. I think based on her
Love
numbers, her
Sam
power
Martyr.
numbers,
Yeah, I
yep,
love Sam Martyr.
yep, would have given us some Big Ten representation, even more than we already had. But I think her power, and she's actually somebody that I played against in high school too. She played at Calabasas High School, which is in the same league as my high school. And I don't remember for sure, but I'm sure if I went back and looked, she probably hit a home run off me back when I was pitching. So, as she did many people, right? But I think she's an interesting one too. And some of these folks are Hall of Famers at their respective programs too, and their respective athletic departments. So in terms of hitters, those are a couple. I would say on the pitching side, uh, one of one of the people that I again could see an argument for, and this is if we're going to talk about championship pedigree and legacy as well, if that's part of the criteria, Megan King from Florida State. We looked at Vanderlinden, right, and her numbers are better if you look at stat for stat and do the comparison side by side. But the fact that, again, the first and only national championship for Florida State, Megan King, is the one who helped bring that to the program and to the team at the time, I could see that argument as well. I could see multiple others too, but those are just a handful of the ones that sprung to mind first. Two people that I do want to give a shout out to for two-way players as well. I mean, if you look at the numbers, who we selected and who ultimately ended up on the list technically do have the better stats, and maybe some have more accolades, etc. But Mariah Maison, when you look at her from Oregon State as a two-way player, this is somebody who, what I'm taking into consideration is just how big her impact as a singular person was on her program and her team, taking them to the World Series back in 2022 against all odds, playing on the road for regionals and for supers, and then still making it there. And she was completely underrated in my view for her entire career. So she's one where I would say like maybe a just missed off of that list. And then, you can't forget about Devin Netz. She's another one too in recent memory that we think about and we're like, okay, yeah, she's someone who can swing it and pitch. And she's the one who said, depends on the day if I feel more like a hitter or a pitcher, but both all the time.
It's a good list in itself. whose idea was it to limit this to 25 anyway? What,
I know.
but no, listen, that's a good list. I'll throw a couple real quick. Brittany Sneed, LSU
Yes.
pitcher.
Yes.
I would argue is still the best, greatest LSU pitcher of all time. She's currently been the pitching coach a long time at Baylor. I think she kind of some recognition there for what
That's
she
a
did
great one.
at
That's a
LSU
great
there.
one.
I was fighting for her. I was
Yep,
scratching on her.
I remember you making the case. Yep. Yep.
So she stood out. Think of some of the hitters of Francesca Ned, Florida, and the Mount Rushmore there. You're talking about some other players. The Georgia hitters. Hard to believe that we have a list and no Georgia hitters, but that was tough. Which Georgia Bulldog do you pick?
Right, because then they're almost in competition with themselves in a
Yes.
way, right? So then that makes it
100%.
hard. Yeah, it's this, but that's how much talent there is. It's
Yes.
like that was one of the most enjoyable parts of it for me was the conversations and everyone making the cases for various people because of this exact reason.
Yes, it took a lot of hours. I personally will not mention what hours late night I was up to when watching. And in fact, I'm actually working on a head coaching list. Which, when I told you this off the air, your eyes like, "What are you doing?" Like, but that'll be for me and on the podcast later on. We might do that at D1. Who knows? But
Yeah.
my last question, I do actually want to ask you. I'm not going to ask you about the head coaching list, but I do want to ask you because I was going through the head coaching names and stuff, and I obviously found Jessica Allister
Yeah.
and the job at John Rittman, both of them. I've been blown away. I wanted to bring this up because you know both of them as well as anybody. I don't know if we appreciate what they've done. Forget that, not just this whole century with what John has done with the Stanford program and building that program up. Comes back years later, starts the Clemson program from scratch. And here they are a year ago, wins the ACC title, what might have been his best job ever, because this was the post Valerie Cagle era. And people are wondering,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know, they're going to be good. I know you were in Clearwater when they got off to a bad start, and you're thinking, well, this is going to be a
tough,
rebuild
yeah.
year. And then Jessica, the job she's done, going back to her Minnesota days, where she turned Minnesota into this powerhouse in the Big Ten, and winning Big Ten titles and being a contender. And then to the point where then she goes to Stanford, back to her alma mater. And I think people forget this when that story broke. There were people that were sort of like, Jessica, are you sure you're doing the right thing here? Because people didn't think Stanford can be a winner again in softball because of the academics, which you heard about all, I'm sure, throughout your entire life. And I remember it was the most awkward interview I've ever had with her. She's awesome. We're both great. I'm the biggest fan of hers. But I remember when I interviewed her right when she got to Stanford, and she just would, every time I would ask her, well, people wondered about the academic, and she was like, what are you talking about? Of course we can win here. Like, it's not a big deal. I'm paraphrasing what she said. Of course, she wasn't a big fan of me asking her about the move, as you know her very well. But then the job she's done at Stanford to get him back as a head coach, and then last year you lose Nyjah, and people are thinking, oh boy, they're gonna have a long year, and you're one win away from the Super Regionals. I think those two have done an incredible job. I wanted to say it first, but just to tell me how, I mean, to me, I would argue both of them just are coming off years where maybe they had doing their best job among many great years of doing a great job. But to me, I was in just kind of studying this head coaching list. Unbelievable what these two have done.
I think you hit on a few different important things there. And it's one of those things where you can think about head coaches from these last 25 years, and you could obviously look at national titles. You're going to think of Patty Gasso, you're going to think of Mike Candrea. There are some obvious names here. You could also think of just the number of World Series that some of these coaches have taken their teams to. For Coach Rittman and Coach Allister, that's two apiece, right? And so you can do that. The winningest coach in history, Carol Hutchins. Okay, the most wins. There are some of those things that are very obvious. But there are other aspects that I think deserve attention as well. And one of those is being able to build up programs. Because if you think back to it, Coach Rittman actually has done that twice. Because he did do that at Stanford. I think technically there was one coach right before him very briefly, but essentially he built up the program to be what it was over those 17, 18 years prior to leaving. So he did that and then did what he did at Clemson, as you mentioned. Coach Allister built what she built at Minnesota, getting them to a #1 ranking for the first time ever in program history. We won't talk about the seedings and things like that went around that, but she did do that. And then coming to Stanford and the complete turnaround that she was able to put in place. And I agree with you. I think you think about building a program and what that means. You think about turning around a program and what that means. I think they've both built, right? But then with Coach Alistair this last year, from a coaching perspective, she'll actually not even just this last year, she'll talk a lot about like because of the academics at Stanford, you don't get to play around as much in the transfer portal. The standards are too high, so the emphasis is really on development. And so it's the development of the athlete among the 4 years that you have them, and how can you get them to be at their best. That's something that is it's the bread and butter, right? At Stanford, you have to do that. And so to only have 3 pitchers, to have lost Nija, of course, in that process, and one of your pitchers, Kylie Chung, had only a fraction of the innings that she did her entire career until that last senior year this past year. A lot of credit to her for stepping up, right? But then you have, and the other 2 are underclassmen. And to do what they did, they hit, right? That was huge for them this last year. But I think another thing that is underrated for Alistair, she's always been great at recruiting. And I don't just say that because she recruited me, but she also knows who to put around her. So Merchant helped her build that program at Minnesota. Sarah Groenewegen, who's on staff, was a part of that Minnesota program. Tori Nyberg has been incredibly key in the buildup of the pitchers. She developed Nigel Kennedy. She developed Elena Vaughter, for example. She did a lot of that buildup. But then Alistair is able to bring in Danielle O'Toole. And what Danielle O'Toole did with that bullpen this last year, they completely outperformed what was on paper their ability to do, and the games that they were able to stay in, and one of the more exciting regionals that we saw in Oregon, et cetera. That takes coaching, right? Like to your point, that takes coaching to be able to do that. And then Rittman in the post Valerie Cagle era is very similar, in that sense. And I think it's the evolution. Anytime I talk to a head coach about longevity, or just being able to have success now versus years ago, like the thing that always comes back around is the ability to adjust. They preach adjustments for the players. They have to make adjustments as coaches as well. And to see the growth that Coach Rittman has, we would have never been allowed to bat flip when I played, but now he's like, you know what, go for it, to the Clemson girls. Maddie Moore tells me that he loves them. They're all good now. I'm like, okay, so this just idea of evolution, I think is really key, and something that they've both done.
Yeah, both tremendous. Of course, you covered him last year. That was kind of cool for you, actually. I just realized you covered him winning the ACC championship in person. And again, I remember when I just looked it up. We voted. We had Ashley Chastain was the winner for a D1 softball head coach of the year. Rightfully so. I mean, she did an incredible job. But
another great job.
Those 2 were right up there, and they're 2 of the best. And they're going to be on my top 25. Their spoiler head coaching list. We'll see. Now I'm going to work until 4 in the morning, though, figuring the rest of it out. You're right, because you make a great point. Those are examples of. It's not just about it's not just about national titles. It's not just about making the World Series. You can do a great job head coaching wise and not make the World Series. And
Yes.
both of them are a great example of that. Both of them were. I mean, John was. I mean, my goodness, he was a win away. He's a 1 base hit away from making the World Series last year against Texas.
Even what they did against Oklahoma a couple years back in Supers.
Yes.
I mean, Patty Gasso credits that Super Regional against Clemson for a big reason why they were able to then go on to win the national championship again, right, that year. But they've been so close so many times. They're just trying to get over that hump. But to do that so quickly, it's incredibly impressive. I mean, it just doesn't happen that fast for established programs, let alone for brand new programs like Clemson.
Alistair was a great defensive catcher in her own right at Stanford in the playing days. I'm not doing defense. You're gonna, if you want to do defense, that's all you. You were,
defense. Well, I'll say this for defense. Sis Bates, have to have her in the conversation, right? Sure. On the defensive side. I will give her credit, and I did mention this in our discussions for some of these, the hitting lists and things. She was also the all-time hits leader at Washington. She's very much known for her defense, and that is her bread and butter. That is the most fun place to watch her on the field. But, give her some credit too, credit where credit's due. But yeah, some of the defensive stuff, I think you and I have both talked about Jesse Warren, some others, that factors in the defensive part of the game, is also a fun conversation to have.
Best defensive play I ever saw in person was the 2018 World Series. I was there for game 1 when Warren makes the play against Washington, which is top 5 iconic play in the history of the World Series.
That's iconic. Bates is a highlight reel, right? Or
Sure.
walking highlight reel. But then you think of Odyssey Alexander too, the diving tag,
As a
right?
yeah, against Oklahoma State.
Defensively as a
Yeah.
pitcher, right? Like there's so many arguments that you can make. A little tougher because there's less stats around
Yes.
defense
Yes.
to make those types of arguments. But even Sis Bates as a middle infielder, she did play second base when Aguilar was still there, and then she moved to short.
Yes.
As a
That
middle infielder, I think her career fielding percentage is 980 plus. That's very, very impressive. That's very impressive.
All right, see, I'm going to defer to you on that one. I mean, we decided not to do it on the site because again, there's not a lot of
It's
stats.
harder to, yeah, yeah.
Because heck, you and I could argue which Husky's better, Sis Bates or Jen Sally
Or Aguilar.
or
Those
Aguilar.
three.
Yeah, yeah.
Think about it. Yeah, exactly.
The only person that probably knows that answer is Heather Turner. She ain't going to give that answer away.
Yeah.
So I have a feeling. All right, well, check out D1 softball for all that. We got the all quarter century content. We might have some more all quarter century down the road moving forward on D1 softball. Who knows? We also got fall reports are underway now as we speak. Jenna's working on them. I've already worked on a few of them this week, so make sure you check out D1 softball. What else are you working on, Jenna?
Everything. No,
Of
I'm
course.
just, I mean, everything you mentioned for D1, yes, we're all super excited. Again, there's off season, but is there really off season? Because there's always stuff going on in this sport. I am in the off season right now for the Believe in Softball podcast, but you can catch up on season 6. It's hard to believe that there have been 6 seasons now. And then also you mentioned some of the broadcasting. So I am covering fall sports too, both men's and women's, but a little emphasis on the women's side. Which I think, rising tide lifts all boats on the women's sports side of things. So between volleyball, field hockey, soccer, etc., just excited to see women's sports continue to grow and to be a part of it.
That's on ACC Network Extra, part of the ESPN app, the new app. I have been pumping it up. I look for you every chance I get, whether it's live or delayed. The beauty of you is you're usually on late, especially in volleyball. So I get to watch you live. Hey, listen, I know we went a little longer than planned, but I warned you about it. Awesome to talk to the now 2-time award-winning Golden Mike Award winner. Congrats on that. You got me beat by 2, so rightfully so. But hey, keep up the great work. Thanks for doing this. This was a blast. I really wanted to. When we did this content for D1 softball on this list, I thought of you because I knew you would have a unique perspective, and you did not disappoint. A pleasure as always. I'll let you get back to your off season of covering and broadcasting 100 sports, but we'll soon, before you know it, softball season will be here, and we'll talk then.
It's very true before you know it. And the true to form, the last hitter that I want to mention that didn't make the list, Taraya Mims Flowers. That's all I'll say. The name. Y'all can look it up.
Another one.
Yeah,
that's another one.
Yes. This was awesome. I mean, these are some of the fun conversations to have, right? To look back on the sport, see how far we've come. We want to go further, but it's very cool to see. And so thank you, Eric, for everything that you do and that Victor does within the circle and beyond, too, to grow our game.